March 15th, 2019, 2:30 in the afternoon. That's when I stood in my 3,200 square foot house and realized I was drowning in my own life. The realtor had just left. The for sale sign would go up tomorrow. My daughter Sarah thought I'd lost my mind. My neighbors whispered behind their curtains. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that everything I'd been taught about security, about success, about what a woman my age should want, it was all wrong. I'm Carol Whitfield. I'm 67 years old, and I sold everything I owned to live in a 240 square foot tiny house. Best decision I ever made after 60. But getting here nearly killed me. The smell of lemon pledge still haunts me. Every Saturday for 23 years, I'd spray that house down from top to bottom. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a formal dining room I used twice a year, a living room that stayed spotless because nobody lived in it. The mortgage was paid off, sure, but the utilities, the maintenance, the endless repairs, it was eating me alive on a fixed income. But it wasn't just the money, it was the emptiness. After my husband died in 2016, that house became a tomb. His coffee cup still sat on the kitchen counter. His tools hung untouched in the garage. I was keeping a museum of a life that was over, and it was burying me alongside him. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was in the master bedroom, staring at his side of the bed, still made, still untouched after 3 years. The silence was so thick I could taste it. That's when I heard it, a creak from the floorboard in the hallway. Just the house settling, but in that moment it sounded like a coffin closing. I walked through those empty rooms and realized I was maintaining 3,200 square feet for one person who barely took up 20. The guest rooms hadn't seen guests in years. The den collected dust. The formal dining room? I ate cereal standing at the kitchen counter most nights. That's when I started researching. Tiny houses. I'd seen them on TV, dismissed them as a fad for young people trying to be trendy. But the more I read, the more it made sense. Less space meant less to clean, less to heat, less to maintain. More money for living instead of just existing. Sarah drove down from Portland when I told her. She sat in that same kitchen where she'd done homework 20 years ago, shaking her head like I was talking about joining a cult. "Mom, you're 64, she said. You can't just throw your life away because you're lonely." Throw my life away? I was already doing that, one empty room at a time. "This house is your security," she kept saying. "What if you get sick? What if you need help? You can't live in some glorified shed." But she wasn't listening. None of them were. My sister called it delayed grief reaction. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, actually had the nerve to say I was having a senior moment. A senior moment that lasted 3 years? I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're still here, maybe you understand what I'm talking about. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about growing old in America. Finding the right builder took 6 months. Half of them looked at me like I was crazy, a 67-year-old woman wanting to build a tiny house. They kept asking if my son or son-in-law was involved in the decision, as if I couldn't possibly manage such a complex thought on my own. But then I found Jake Morrison, a carpenter out of Eugene who'd built tiny houses for retirees before. He didn't talk down to me, didn't ask about my family's opinion, just listened to what I wanted and figured out how to make it happen. The design phase was like planning a puzzle. Every inch had to serve at least 2 purposes. The kitchen island doubled as a dining table and storage. The staircase to the loft had drawers built into each step. The living area converted to a guest space when Sarah visited. But the real work wasn't in the building. It was in the letting go. 43 years of marriage produces a lot of stuff. Photo albums from when film came in canisters, Christmas ornaments that hadn't seen a tree in a decade, furniture that belonged to my mother and her mother before that. Each item came with a story, a memory, a reason why I couldn't possibly get rid of it. The estate sale was brutal. Watching strangers rifle through my wedding china, haggle over furniture I'd saved for 30 years to buy. A young couple bought our bedroom set for $200, the same set Richard and I had slept in for 2 decades. They loaded it into their truck like it was nothing. That night I sat on the floor of my nearly empty house and cried until my chest ached. Not because I was sad, but because I was terrified. What if Sarah was right? What if I was making the biggest mistake of my life? The tiny house was ready in November. Moving day was surreal. Everything I owned fit in a 16-foot U-Haul truck with room to spare. No moving company needed, no army of relatives to help. Just me, Jake, and his assistant, transferring my entire life in 4 hours. The first night was the hardest. The ceiling felt low. The walls felt close. Every sound seemed amplified. The wind through the metal roof, the settling of new wood, the hum of the compact refrigerator. I lay in the loft, staring through the skylight at stars I'd never noticed in my old neighborhood, and wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Winter tested everything: the propane heating system, the composting toilet, my resolve. The space felt even smaller when I couldn't step outside. Sarah called every day, waiting for me to crack, to beg her to help me find a nice apartment somewhere. But something strange happened around Christmas. I was making coffee in my tiny kitchen, 8 steps from my bed to my coffee maker, and I realized I was humming. I hadn't hummed in years. The space that felt claustrophobic in November felt cozy in December. By spring, I understood why. There was no wasted space for sadness to hide in, no empty rooms where grief could echo. Every corner of my tiny house was alive because I lived in every corner of it. The money situation was even better than I'd hoped. The house sold for $284,000. After paying off the tiny house build and buying the land, I had over $200,000 in the bank. My monthly expenses dropped from $1,800 to $400. For the first time since Richard died, money wasn't a constant worry. But the real transformation was deeper than financial. In a big house, I'd been rattling around like a marble in a jar. In the tiny house, everything fit, including me. Someone once told me there are rules that change after 60. One of them says that acceptance after 60 is surrender. I wish I'd known that 30 years ago. If you want to know what those rules are, it's in the description. People started visiting, not because they felt sorry for me, but because they were curious. Word spread through my old neighborhood about the crazy lady who sold everything to live in a tiny house. They came expecting to find a cautionary tale. Instead, they found someone who'd figured out what they were all struggling with: how to live fully in the space you actually occupy. My utility bills average $47 a month. My property taxes are $300 a year. I spend my mornings drinking coffee on my tiny porch, watching deer graze in the meadow outside my window. I spend my afternoons reading, something I'd forgotten I loved because I was always too busy maintaining that big house. Evening walks became a ritual. In the old neighborhood, I barely knew my neighbors. Out here, the couple in the farmhouse down the road brings me fresh eggs. The family with the llama farm invites me to their barbecues. Community found me when I stopped hiding in rooms I didn't need. Sarah finally visited last spring. She'd been avoiding it, I think, afraid of what she'd find. Some broken down mother living in squalor? Instead, she found me gardening, healthier than I'd been in years, genuinely happy for the first time since her father died. "Mom," she said, sitting on my tiny porch with a cup of coffee, "I owe you an apology. You weren't running away from life. You were running toward it." The apology meant everything, but I'd already learned the lesson. Other people's fear of change doesn't have to become your prison. Last month, Mrs. Henderson from the old neighborhood called. Her husband passed in February. She's been rattling around their 4-bedroom house ever since, crying in rooms that hold nothing but memories. She asked if I had any advice. I told her about the tiny house, about the freedom that comes from owning your space instead of your space owning you, about the difference between security and safety. Security is having a big house that makes you feel important. Safety is having a life that fits. "But what will people think?" she asked. I looked out my window at the meadow where I've watched 4 seasons change, where I've seen more sunrises than in all my years in that big house combined. "They'll think you're brave," I told her, "and they'll be right." The hardest part about this story isn't what I gave up. It's how long I waited to give it up. How many years I spent maintaining a life that was too big for the person I'd become. After everything I went through, I found the 60-year rule. It has 9 rules that explain exactly why everything I believed was wrong after 60. It changed how I see my family, my health, my money, everything. Check the description. I'm not telling you to sell your house and buy a tiny one. I'm telling you that the life you're holding on to might be the one that's holding you back. That the space you think you need might be the space that's keeping you from living. There's a difference between downsizing and right-sizing. Downsizing is about less. Right-sizing is about enough. At 67, I learned that enough is not a compromise. It's a revelation. My tiny house sits on 3/4 of an acre. I have room for a garden, space for Sarah's kids to run when they visit, privacy when I need it. But most importantly, I have a home that fits the life I want to live, not the life I thought I was supposed to want. Every morning, I wake up in a space where everything has a purpose and a place, including me. The coffee maker is 3 steps from my bed. The shower is 8 steps from my closet. My books are within arm's reach of my reading chair. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is excess. Nothing is just for show. The view from my kitchen window changes with the seasons. Spring brings wildflowers. Summer brings hummingbirds at the feeder. Fall brings colors I never noticed when I was too busy cleaning rooms I didn't use. Winter brings a silence that isn't lonely anymore. It's peaceful. When people ask if I miss the big house, I tell them the truth. I don't miss the house. I miss who I was when I lived there, younger, with Richard, with Sarah still at home, with a future I thought I could predict. But missing the past and living in it are different things. The tiny house taught me that. The first year was about surviving the change. The second year was about adapting to the change. The third year, this year, has been about understanding why the change was necessary. I needed to shed more than square footage. I needed to shed the version of myself that believed more was always better, that comfort meant excess, that a woman my age should want safety over adventure. The tiny house didn't give me a new life. It gave me my life back. Sarah brings the grandkids now. They love the loft, fight over who gets to sleep in the tiny bedroom. They think Grandma's house is the coolest fort ever built. They're not wrong. Last weekend, my grandson Tommy asked why I don't live in a big house like other grandmas. Because, I told him, I finally figured out the right size for me. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Kids understand what adults forget, that more isn't always better. Sometimes it's just more. The tiny house movement isn't about the house. It's about the movement away from stuff and toward life, away from maintaining and toward living, away from what you're supposed to want and toward what you actually want. I'm 67 years old. I live in 240 square feet. I've never been happier, healthier, or more free. And every day I remember that it's never too late to right-size your life. The best decision after 60 isn't about what you keep. It's about what you let go.